Hey guys, and welcome back to another lesson on fractions. My name is Miss Danielson, and today we're looking at multiplying fractions or finding fractions of an amount. I hope you joined us for our previous lessons on equivalent fractions and simplifying fractions. I'll link them down in the description box for you below. But today's lesson will be very different from adding and subtracting fractions because we don't need common denominators today. Today we'll be working out fractions of whole numbers, as well as finding a fraction of a fraction, like cutting a pie into some number of equal sized pieces, and then only eating a fraction of one of those pieces. Let's start with the basics though. You should know by now that fractions involve a numerator, which is at the top, and a denominator, which is at the bottom, where the denominator is the number of pieces that we cut or divide a value into, and the numerator is the number of those pieces that we have. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the pieces. Have a look at the pies I've got up top here. Which of these pies have been cut into the smallest pieces? Is it this one that was cut into 3 equal-sized pieces? This one which was cut into 4 equal-sized pieces? This one which was cut into 5 equal-sized pieces? Or this one which was cut into 6 equal-sized pieces? 1/6 is definitely smaller than 1/3. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece. Now, if I were to cut those pies again, you can see that those pieces are getting even smaller, while the number of pieces in total is getting bigger. When we multiply a value by a number less than 1, the answer will always become smaller. And this takes us into fractions of an amount. For example, half of 12 is the same thing as half multiplied by 12. And I hope we all know that half of 12 is 6. So while we multiplied 12 by some value, since that value was a number less than 1, the answer is smaller than the number we started with. Let me take this one step further to make sure I'm being clear. A fraction of an amount is some part of the total. And mathematically speaking, when we work out a fraction of an amount, it's the same thing as working out some fraction multiplied by that amount. This is exactly the same theory behind finding some number of an amount as being that multiple of the amount. Now maybe this is getting a bit wordy, so let's try with an example. If I wanted to know how many cookies were in 5 boxes of cookies, that's some number of some amount, we would work this out by doing 5 times the number of cookies in a box. So some number of an amount is some number multiplied by that amount. In the same way, we could work out the number of cookies in half a box of cookies by doing a multiplication of a half by the number of cookies in the box. So very often when you see of in a question, that means multiplication. But when we multiply by a fraction, that tends to end up with some division involved. For example, a half multiplied by the number of cookies in a box would be the same thing as the number of cookies in a box divided by 2. Or as we're getting used to working with fractions here, the number of cookies in a box over 2. Remember again, the denominator is the number of pieces we are cutting or dividing our value into. That's right, fractions are divisions. When we multiply by a fraction, we multiply by the top, that's the numerator, but we divide by the bottom, the denominator. So again, our example of half of 12 being 1/2 multiplied by 12, taking us through the steps here, that would be 12 multiplied by the top, so timesing by the 1, and then dividing that answer by 2. 12 times 1 is simply 12, and 12 divided by 2 is the answer we knew from the beginning. Half of 12 is 12 divided by 2, which is 6. Now maybe that example was too simple, so let's try another one. But this time I want you to keep in mind that when we multiply by a fraction, we have to multiply by the top and divide by the bottom, but not necessarily in that order. We may want to divide by the bottom first and then multiply by the top. Let me show you an example where that would be helpful. For example, 5/12 of 48 would mean 5/12 multiplied by 48. So when we multiply by the top and divide by the bottom, we would do 5 times 48 divided by 12. But I'm hoping you're looking at this and thinking 5 times 48, that gets quite big. Then I need to work with big numbers in my head. Rather than first multiplying by the 5, let's start by dividing by the 12. So we'll do 48 divided by the denominator 12, and then we'll multiply that answer by 5. Now we're working with smaller numbers. 48 divided by 12 is just 4. So 4 times 5, that's 20. That saved you a lot of difficult mental calculations by first simplifying your question before you work it through. Now that we understand how to find a fraction of amount, that should include finding fractions of fractional amounts. And as we know that finding a fraction of an amount is multiplying some amount by a fraction, finding a fraction of a fraction means multiplying two fractions together. When we multiply two fractions together, we just need to multiply the tops together and multiply the bottoms together. And of course, remember that a fraction is simply a division. So the result in the numerator is being divided by the result in the denominator. For example, 1/4 of 3/5 means multiply 1/4 times 3/5. And this is pretty straightforward. We do not need a common denominator. We're just going to multiply the tops together and multiply the bottoms together. So 1 times 3 over 4 times 5. 1 times 3 is 3, 4 times 5 is 20. So we've got our solution. That's 3/20. Just double check that your fraction can't be simplified. Now 3 is a prime number. It can only divide by 1 and 3. And 20 can't be divided by 3. So that's already simplified. We're done. Always take a minute to look over your answer to make sure that it makes sense. We've done 1/4 of 3/5 and we've got an answer of 3/20. That denominator is very big, which means this value is very small. Remember that when we multiply by a value less than 1, the answer becomes smaller. So if I started out with a fraction of value of 3/5 and I'm finding 1/4 of that value, so a fraction of that value, my answer is getting even smaller. 3/20 is tiny. Let's see if we're ready to put that into practice now. For the following questions, I want you to copy the questions and show your working. No calculators, please. Go ahead and hit pause. Copy these questions down now. Take the time to show your working. Double check that your answer makes sense and is simplified. And push play when you're ready to take it up. I hope you had a chance to hit pause. No peeking ahead. Here come your answers. For question 1A, we're doing 35 times the top and divide by the bottom. That's just 35 divided by 5, which is 7. For B, we'll times by the top and divide by the bottom. You may want to divide by the bottom first, though. We already know that 35 divided by 5 is 7. So it's 3 times 7 is 21. For question C, again, times by the top and divide by the bottom. And again, a division by the bottom might be better first here. 4 times 7, 28. For question 2, again, multiply by the top and divide by the bottom. I think it's easier to divide first. For question B, multiply by the top, divide by the bottom. Again, that 16 can divide by 4, so let's do that first. Question C, multiply by the top and divide by the bottom. In this case, our numerator is going to get quite big, but we can't divide 35 by 14 first. However, you might have noticed that we can simplify this fraction before we even get to the answer. So rather than doing 2 times 35, let's do top divided by 2 and bottom divided by 2, which leaves us with 35 on the top and 7 on the bottom. 35 divided by 7, we should be able to do. For question 3, a fraction of a fraction, we'll multiply those two fractions together. Tops multiply together and bottoms multiply together. Now that fraction can be simplified. We can divide both top and bottom by 2. Now you may have noticed that we could have done that in the first step. 1 times 2 over 2 times 5, both top and bottom have got a 2 in the product, so we can divide both top and bottom by 2 there. In any case, 2/10, divide the top by 2 and divide the bottom by 2, is equivalent to 1/5, although simplifying at the beginning takes us right there. Question B, multiply those fractions together, and let's see if you can figure out how to simplify this before you multiply it through. What can we divide both top and bottom by? That's right, so our answer directly is 1/5. For question C, multiply those fractions together. Can I divide the top by anything I can also divide the bottom by? Nothing other than 1, right? So we can't simplify this one. It's simply going to be 3/20. Question 4, multiply your fractions together. I can't find a common factor, top and bottom, so I'm just going to multiply these through. 9/16. Question 4b, notice something before you do your multiplications. 3/6, that fraction could be simplified. That's the same thing as a half. A half times 14/15. We'll multiply the tops together. 14 times 1 is simply 14, and multiply the bottoms together. Now I haven't done this multiplication because I've noticed that there's a common factor for the top and the bottom. I can divide them both by 2. 14 divided by 2 is 7, and 15 times 2 divided by 2, that 2 is gone, so I've got 7/15. Question C, multiply them together. Is there common factors? There definitely are. I can divide both top and bottom by 2. That will be just 7 on the top, and 12 divided by 2 is 6, so 8 times 6 on the bottom. I can't find any other common factors, so let's just finish multiplying this through. 7/48. Now you may not have used these tricks that I've been using for quick mental calculation. However, I hope that you found them helpful and might try using them in the future. Other than that, if you had any problems, please let me know down in the comments section. Otherwise, well done, keep practicing, and I'll see you soon.